The sky has become an open wound stretched wide above us, bruised with ash and heat. It hasn't been blue in years. Some days it bleeds orange, streaked with black smoke from fires that never really die, only crawl across new ground, hungrier each time. Other days it dims to a dull gray, the kind that presses on your chest until it feels like you're suffocating. Once, I remember, skies used to mean something: sunlight, storms, seasons. Now they're just a warning. Another blaze, another storm, another stretch of heat that strips the land bare. The rivers are gone. What remains are their skeletons, long scars across the earth, deep and dry, like open mouths begging for water that will never come. I walked through one of them last month. The Missouri River, I think it used to be. A vast canyon of cracked silt, littered with rusted boats that now sit frozen in the dust, tilted on their sides like stranded fish. You can still see docks reaching into nothing, where people once tied their lives to something steady. I imagine the sound of rushing water, but the silence is louder. It eats at you until you almost wish you'd never remembered. Cities are worse. You'd think they'd be safer with their walls of concrete and steel, but they're just tombs now. Glass towers that once caught the morning light are burned black, hollowed out by flame or collapse. Streets are filled with husks of cars, abandoned in long lines that go nowhere, doors hanging open, windows shattered. On windy nights, the metal groans and shifts, and it almost sounds like the city itself is crying. I stayed in one for a while, a place that might have been St. Louis once, but even the street signs are corroded and broken. The fires never left, and the air made my throat raw after only a few hours. People say you can live in the cities if you find the right building, but those people never last long. They either choke on the air, starve, or get picked off by the ones who have made the ruins their hunting grounds. Government. That word doesn't mean anything anymore. Whatever leaders were left, they either fled to bunkers that no one sees or fell with the rest of us. You hear rumors of camps run by soldiers, holding on to discipline, to order, but I've never seen one. What remains instead are factions, loose groups of survivors who cling together because they have to, not because they trust each other. Some call themselves communities, but they're more like tribes. The kind that'll share food with you one day and cut your throat the next if they think you've got more than they do. And then there are the scavengers. Not a group, just a way of life. They move like shadows through what's left of civilization, tearing apart what little remains. A radio tower, a water pump, a broken wind turbine. You'll wake one morning to find it stripped for parts. They've got no loyalty, no future. Just hunger gnawing at their bones and driving them to keep taking until there's nothing left to take. I've crossed paths with them. Eyes like glass, voices hoarse from breathing dust, hands always twitching as if reaching for something to steal. You don't stay near scavengers unless you want to end like them. Nature, if you can even call it that anymore, has turned against us. The forests are skeletal, blackened sticks clawing at the sky. Animals are rarer each year. You hear whispers of wolves roaming in packs, but I've never seen them. The truth is, most of what lived here has already gone, starved or scorched out of existence. I saw a bird once, a crow maybe, wheeling in the smoke. I followed it for an hour, hoping it knew of some water, some scrap of life. It led me nowhere, just more dust, more silence. The nights are no kinder. They used to bring relief, a soft cool after the heat of the day. Now they carry storms. Acid rain hisses against the ground, eating away whatever it touches. You learn quick not to get caught out in it. Shelter is the only prayer left. And when the thunder rolls, it doesn't sound like weather. It sounds like the earth itself is splitting, piece by piece. What's left of civilization are fragments. A broken radio signal drifting across the static. A lone lantern glowing on a rooftop. A field of plastic bottles filled with the last clean water someone managed to find. These are our landmarks now, not monuments or cathedrals, but scraps of survival that prove someone somewhere is still fighting against the end. But there's an anxiety you can't shake. Every day feels like waiting for another blow, another collapse. The ground itself feels brittle, ready to break apart beneath us. Sometimes you wake up to a new fissure running across the earth where there wasn't one before, wide enough to swallow a house whole. Sometimes the air grows so hot it feels like breathing fire. And sometimes it's just the silence, too heavy, too still. A reminder that everything is fragile and tomorrow might not come. The world we knew is gone, and what remains is only a shadow. A place where landmarks have no names, where the seasons are only degrees of suffering, where people become ghosts long before they die. And yet, somehow, we keep going. Each sunrise is a gamble, and each breath feels borrowed. But in this broken place, that's enough. Enough to make you wonder if survival itself is the last story worth telling. My name doesn't matter much anymore. Names don't hold the same weight they once did. Out here, you're not a father or a neighbor or a man with a mortgage. You're just alive or you're not. Still, if you're listening, I'll give you mine, because a name is the only proof we ever had that we were real. My name is Daniel Mercer, though most people who still catch my signal just call me the voice on the radio. I wasn't always this. Once, I was a sound engineer at a local station in Kansas City, back when music poured through car speakers on morning commutes, and weather reports were just small inconveniences, not death sentences. I knew the rhythms of human life, the laughter between songs, the chatter of hosts, the hum of advertisements reminding people to buy things they didn't need. My job was simple: keep the airwaves alive. I never thought that one day I'd be doing the same thing, but to remind people we're still alive. The world collapsed slowly, then all at once. I lost track of the exact moment it all tipped. Maybe it was the year the rivers dried to nothing, or when the heat waves made whole states uninhabitable. Maybe it was the riots, when stores were emptied and neighborhoods became battlefields. Or maybe it was just the silence that followed, when no one had the strength to fight anymore. I just know one morning, the station went dark. People stopped calling in. My coworkers stopped showing up, and I was left with a building full of static and silence. That's when I made the choice. I scavenged what I could: solar panels, car batteries, an old pedal generator. I rewired the transmitter myself, fingers bleeding from stripped copper and busted circuits. I moved the rig into a half-collapsed basement where the walls kept the heat out, and the concrete swallowed the sound of the wind. And I began speaking again. Not for news, not for music, not for ratings, just to remind whoever's left that they aren't alone. I tell stories. I report what I see when I travel. Sometimes I read pages from books I've scavenged, old poetry, forgotten novels, fragments of science texts. I record the weather, though it's mostly the same: hot, dry, unrelenting. Some nights, when the air feels kinder, I let music play from the dusty vinyl records I found in an abandoned store. The crackle of the record player blends with the static, and for a moment, it almost feels like the world remembers what joy used to sound like. But if I'm honest, the broadcasts aren't really for others. They're for me. Talking into the static, sending my voice into the void, it reminds me that I exist, that I'm still here. The hardest part of surviving isn't hunger, or thirst, or even the heat. It's the silence. It's the way your own thoughts echo so loud that they become unbearable. The way you forget the sound of another human voice. Broadcasting, even if no one listens, is my rebellion against that silence. Of course, I've had losses, too many to count. My wife, Claire, didn't make it past the second wave of heat waves. We tried, God, we tried. Wet cloths, darkened rooms, rationing what little water we had. But one day she just stopped waking up. She looked peaceful, almost like she was sleeping, but the silence of her breath was louder than any scream I've ever heard. I buried her beneath a tree that didn't survive the following summer. Now there's nothing there but dust. We had a daughter too, Lucy. She was 8, bright, stubborn, with a laugh that used to echo down the hallways of our house like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. When the riots began, when people were breaking into homes for food, for water, I made the mistake of thinking I could protect her. But you can't fight hunger. You can't fight desperation. A group came through one night, and in the chaos, I lost her. I don't know if she made it. I tell myself she did, that maybe she's with a group somewhere. Maybe she remembers the sound of my voice on the radio. Maybe she's listening right now. It's a lie, but it's the only one that keeps me standing. What drives me to keep going? I've asked myself that every day for years. Some mornings when my throat is raw and my stomach aches, I wonder why I bother. Why I keep pedaling the generator. Why I keep speaking into the static. But then I remember that hope isn't about believing things will get better. It's about refusing to let the world decide when you're finished. I don't broadcast because I believe someone will save us. I broadcast because silence means surrender. And sometimes I hear something back. Not often. Once every few months, a faint signal breaks through. A voice, warped and fading, calling out coordinates or just a word, alive. The first time I heard it, I wept. Not because I understood them, but because the sound of another human voice reminded me I wasn't the last. That even if the world has turned to ash, there are still sparks in the dark. Survival now is an art of compromise. I scavenge what I can from the ruins. Water is harder each year. Plastic bottles buried in rubble, tanks from collapsed buildings, the rare rain I can trap in broken tarps. Food is cans dented with age, packets of rice or beans so stale they taste like dust. Once, I found a stash of seeds in an abandoned shed, and I tried to grow them in the cracked soil outside my station. Nothing sprouted. The earth is too tired. Still, I keep the seeds in a jar. A promise, maybe, that one day they'll take root again. Travel is dangerous but necessary. The station only provides shelter, not life. Every few weeks I set out with a battered backpack and a hand-cranked radio, moving through the wasteland like a ghost. I avoid the cities, stick to the back roads, listen for the hum of voices or the sound of trouble. I've seen others on the road, some kind, some cruel, most desperate. I don't stay long. Connections are fragile, and out here, attachments can kill you. But sometimes I leave messages scratched into walls or painted on broken billboards. Still broadcasting, still alive. The truth is, I'm not a hero. I'm just stubborn. Stubborn enough to keep breathing, stubborn enough to keep talking, stubborn enough to believe that my voice matters in a world that doesn't want to hear it. I've lost everything else. Family, home, certainty. But as long as I have this transmitter, as long as the signal reaches into the static, I have something. And maybe, just maybe, someone else out there has something too. When I sit in the dim glow of the generator, headphones pressed to my ears, speaking into the microphone, I sometimes imagine the mirrors. Those strange, fractured things that survive the fires. They say if you look into a mirror now, it doesn't reflect your world, it shows another. I've tested it myself. Old shards of glass scavenged from buildings, silvering peeled and warped. I look and I see skies that aren't mine. Blue skies. Storms of rain. Even cities that look alive with lights glowing like fireflies. I don't know if it's madness or memory or something else. But when I see them, I feel something stir in me. Maybe hope, maybe grief. Maybe just proof that the world we lost still lingers somewhere in some way. So I keep talking. I keep surviving, because if there's even a chance, just one, that my daughter is listening, that someone is listening, then I refuse to go quiet. This is Daniel Mercer, and I'm still here. They tell stories in neat timelines. Heat wave year, the year the rivers failed, the second wave of fires. The truth is messier. The world did not end in a single headline. It collapsed in overlapping crises that fed each other until there was nothing left to stop the fall. For us it began with water. Not a sudden vanish, but a steady theft. Snowpacks shrank, spring melt came early and fast, then nothing. Rainy seasons slid like a missed train, shorter, warmer, and always too late. We learned the word evapotranspiration the hard way. Water that used to soak into the soil now leapt back up into a hotter sky. Streams that had carved the valley since before anyone kept dates ran thinner each year, like breath growing shallow. A few years in, the wells started coughing up sand. I can remember the smell before the storm of collapse. Irradiated dust, dry hay, the bearing of earth. Then the storms came, if you can call them that. They were not gentle rain-bearing systems, but convective monsters, the sort of wind that ripped off roofs and rolled whole cars like toy chests. When the storms hit now, they were violent and brief, leaving salt and acid where green should have been. We learned to fear clouds as much as drought. The direct cause, so far as anyone out here can say with certainty, was a web of feedback loops no one stopped in time. The oceans warmed, carrying more moisture and more energy. The jet stream buckled and stalled, holding heat domes over regions for weeks on end. Forests, stressed and thirsty, became kindling. Once fire found that kindling, it burned not just trees but the soil itself. Organic matter turned to ash. The sponge of the land burned away. Without that sponge, rain hit hard and ran away, washing the last thin layer of topsoil into gullies that would never fill again. You hear the science now in fragments over my radio. Measurements I read off an old NOAA printout. I salvaged from a library before the shelves were looted. Temperatures that used to peak for a week in July now hang for months. Weather patterns that used to be predictable became jokes. The data is ugly, but the numbers mattered less than the result. Where there had once been abundance, there was now scarcity, and scarcity breeds a particular kind of desperation. Survival became arithmetic: food, water, fuel, power, each a declining variable you had to balance if you wanted to be counted among the living. Water is the worst ledger. I ration it like prayer. A liter for shaving some semblance of cleanliness. A liter a day if I'm careful to avoid heat exhaustion. I keep a few plastic drums buried under rubble, a handful of ceramic filters scavenged from old camping stores, and a stack of iodine tablets I trade for canned goods when I can find traders brave enough to move between the ruins. I rigged a condensation trap over a shallow pit once, a cold night and a plastic sheet, a rock at the center dripping dew into a cup. It gave me just enough to keep from thinking too dark thoughts. People call these devices solar stills, and they work if the sun is patient and the ground still holds some moisture. Most of the time, the ground is too dry to bother. Food follows the same unkind law. Canned goods last, if someone didn't already take them. But canned food is heavy and rare and expensive in barter. Preserved seeds were once our insurance against scarcity. I still keep a jar of seeds beneath a floorboard like a relic. I tried to plant them in a patch of soil I fenced with broken pallets and rusted rebar. We waited, watered with scraped condensation and filtered water, and watched the seedlings curl and die in the heat. The soil had become a kind of concrete, nutrient poor, baked by years of high daytime temperatures and cooled at night by thin, acid soaks of rain. Even when plants take, pests and theft take the rest. Fuel and power are the third arithmetic. My transmitter runs off a battered generator and a bank of scavenged batteries. The generator coughs when it's cold, but it drinks gasoline like a thirsty man drinks from a pond. Gasoline is simpler than water in a way. You either find it in an abandoned service station or you siphon it from rusting cars nobody wants. But siphoning is dangerous. You'll attract attention. Batteries hold charge for fewer cycles now. Old lead-acid banks corrode. Lithium packs swell and die. Solar panels have been lifesavers for some. I strip panels from rooftops on dead buildings and jury-rig them into a small array. In bright months they will keep lights on, pump a little water from low wells and charge radios. But the panels are themselves a target. I have watched men fight over a single panel in the downpour of a windstorm because sunlight was worth fighting for. And then there are people, other people. There are the friendly kinds, if you can afford to call them that. A woman in a caravan outside of Topeka taught me to use a charcoal filter she'd cobbled from a propane tank and sand. A wiry old man in a farmer's hat traded me a jar of preserved peaches for a night's worth of radio announcements listing the whereabouts of a lost child. Those exchanges remind me that human kindness didn't entirely evaporate the day the rivers did. But there are also raiders. These are the dangerous, organized ones who learned early that violence is an efficient means to wealth in a world without law. They come in vehicles rammed with metal plates, with dogs and guns and faces twisted by hunger. I once found their camp where they had beaten a small community into a kind of grim feudal order, protection and tribute, but not kindness. They patrol the roads, set up roadblocks of burned cars, and take what they want. We learn to avoid main highways for the same reason you stop going to market in the middle of a plague. Too many eyes, too many desperate hands. Then there are the factions, loose communities who act like governments without the staff. We hear rumors over the airwaves of a greenhold, up north where water is rationed and seeds are valued like gold. There are broadcasts from the Consortium, a scavenger coalition that claims to trade technology for allegiance. None of these groups are monoliths of virtue. Alliances are fragile, so is trust. A healer's tent might be run by a decent person one week and under the thumb of a ruthless commander the next. Survival becomes moral compromise. I barter my voice for favors. I shared coordinates to a half-hidden spring with a caravan who promised to bring medicine. They said they would. They didn't. The moral calculus out here is corrosive. Help someone and you might be helping a future enemy. The weather itself has become an actor in the conflict. Dust storms, those walls of choking sand and glass, can come out of nowhere and last a day, a week, sometimes longer. You hunker below corrugated metal, listen to the wind shriek, and you count breaths until the storm passes. Later you peer out to a landscape reborn as blanched ruins, where every exposed surface is fuzzed with abrasive grit. Fires do not behave like they used to. Once, you'd see a line of flame you'd escape. Now the fires jump gaps the size of rivers, riding thermals of superheated air and landing on dry roofs like an intentional act. They destroy not just fuel and shelter, but the infrastructure, pipes, solar arrays, the delicate wiring of civilization. Scientific explanation helps with survival because knowledge gives you tools. If the jet stream stalls, that means heat will linger longer, shade and water are more valuable. If topsoil is gone, planting low-depth plants or using worms in shaded containers may yield something. If the rain is acidic, boiling will remove pathogens, but not the dissolved chemicals. Activated charcoal filters help here. Knowing that intense sunlight degrades plastics faster means you bury water drums in shaded rubble to slow evaporation. These are small, desperate lessons learned by trial and error, and by listening to people across the static who have tried and failed and tried again. Why is it harder every day? Because every resource is finite and the mechanisms that replenish them have been broken. The simple cycles, the snowmelt that fed rivers, the forests that condensed moisture into the ground, have been damaged. The planet's systems used to act like a reservoir. Now they drip, then stop. Each year the remaining reserves of water and fuel shrink. Each year more people compete for the leftover stores. Each year the infrastructure of society, roads that let traders move, simple law that keeps raiders at bay, hospitals with electricity, breaks down a little more. Repair becomes impossible when there are no replacement parts and no guarantees that tools will function beyond today. Actionable survival, in practical terms, is a long list of small strategies. Harvest every drop of condensation you can. Roof gutters, tarps, plastic sheeting. Always carry a backup water filter and iodine tablets. Rotate your battery bank to preserve longevity. Bury perishables in cool shaded caches. Grow food in raised beds with compost and shade cloth to reduce evaporation. Move quietly. Avoid main roads. Trade useful skills. Radio repair, water purification for goods, and never trust anyone who offers protection in exchange for absolute obedience. For me, the crisis is not a single storm or an empty well. It is the daily grinding loss. Another well gone, another friend that doesn't answer the frequency, another panel ripped off a roof. It is the knowledge that the planet has changed its rules and we are still learning how to play. Each broadcast I send is not only a story or a piece of weather. It's a small transmission of survival data, a warning, a plea. Tonight the horizon glows with a thin line of orange. There are fires on the ridge again. Somewhere down the road a group is moving with engines humming. I check my water barrels, tighten the straps on the spare batteries, and listen for voices on the static. The crisis is not a headline I can outrun. It is the air in my lungs, thin and hot, the single dented can of peaches on a shelf, the way the world keeps giving you one more thing to worry about. So we keep doing the arithmetic. We ration, we barter, we hide, we share, and sometimes we fight. We teach the few lessons we have left to anyone who will listen. We pass on the small science of staying alive. And we broadcast, because telling others how to survive is, in its own stubborn way, part of the work of staying human. The dust is settling into the grooves of my teeth. It finds the soft places on my face and nests there like a claim. I've been scraping it out of corners with a credit card for years. It's a ritual as familiar as tuning the transmitter. Lately it tastes like nothing I remember, metal, old pepper, a hint of ash. The station's roof is a patchwork of tarps and scavenged sheet metal. Tonight the wind is thin and high and carries the smell of smoke from somewhere out past the ridge. That line of orange on the horizon is getting closer, or maybe I'm getting slower. Either way, worry is a constant I can no longer afford to put off. Resources are a calculus of shame. I count them every morning like a rosary. Drums of water, 3 full, 2 half. Canned food, 18 tins of peaches, 12 tins of beans, a half dozen cans of meat that have the texture of rubber. Batteries, 1 good bank, 2 patchy, 2 dead. Fuel enough to run the generator for about 5 days if I ration. Each day I shave a little off the margins, and I know the math well enough to see the end. There's always a week or 2 or maybe a month, but the horizon keeps moving sooner than it should. Food is theft by seasons. Cans don't run out, they get taken. One clear morning I woke to find half my pantry shelves emptied. Not all the cans were gone. Someone had sorted, taken what they thought would last longest. Whoever it was left the jars of preserved peaches. Maybe they were saving those for someone else, or maybe they wanted to leave a message. Instead, there was a crude symbol scratched into the wood, a circle with a line through it. I've learned to catalog marks and signs. They are the new language of the road. The raids began months ago, slow and probing at first. A dozen men with crossbows and hoods, testing fences, breaking into sheds. They moved like wolves, moving fast and vanishing into trees. Then came the heavy ones, trucks with spikes welded to their bumpers, men with hardened faces who knew how to use a gun and how to use fear. Once they took a neighbor's generator, 2 chickens, and 3 jars of seed. They offered a choice, leave quietly or stay and be taken. The neighbor left, and 2 weeks later his footprints stopped at a shallow grave. I have a few rules left that aren't written down, but I've promised myself to keep. Never trade your last liter of water. Never give away a working battery. Never sleep with the door unlocked if you can avoid it. These rules are small anchors in a world where anchors tend to break. But rules don't stop raids. They only make you slightly less vulnerable. Then there are the subtler threats, the ones with smiles and slow hands who offer friendship in exchange for allegiance. A caravan came by 3 months ago, lantern bobbing like a lanterned promise. They pulled up their carts and a woman with hair like straw called out sweet names, words that sounded like memory. They wanted to listen to the broadcast. They wanted to trade. They wanted me to give them the coordinates of a shallow well I had found last winter. I refused. They smiled and left. A week later, the well was dry, siphoned, dug up, the PVC broken. Someone had told them where to look. Trust is a currency more fragile than coin. I've bartered it and lost it and sometimes regifted it foolishly. There was a kid once, maybe 12, who showed up at the station with a face missing some innocence and an old radio slung over his shoulder. He said he was following my signal for months. He swallowed the dust and offered me a jar of home-cured jerky he'd traded from another group, a pawnbroker's honesty. I kept him for a week. He polished my antenna, stole a spare battery, and left before dawn. The shame sat in my stomach like a stone for days. The kid's face still floats up sometimes when I tune the static. Young, hungry, determined, smart enough to survive by taking what he needed. The wrongdoing in this world is often just the luxury of choice. If you can take and run, most people will. And yet rumors circulate like sparks. They are stubborn and persistent and sometimes useful. The myth that won't die is Greenhold, a name like a promise. It floats across the frequencies in bursts of static and hope. A valley where the aquifers rose again after an earthquake rerouted a buried spring. A community with working filters and a greenhouse built from storm glass. A place where seeds sprouted like a memory. People talk about it like churchgoers whispering about miracles. I have half a dozen callers on record who swear they heard a voice saying Greenhold is real. Most of those tapes are thin and full of interference. Some of them are probably scams. People spinning a story to get donations, to collect parts, to lure travelers into ambush. But every so often, a detail sticks. A radio cadence, a name, a specific landmark. A windmill on a broken highway. A rusted sign with 3 letters left. A coal car painted white with a blue star. Hope is legal tender in a dying economy. I read about Greenhold on the air because I can't afford not to. If there is a place that has water, more than a trickle and a rumor, then broadcasting that possibility might save lives. It might also get me killed for being careless. I moved the microphone closer and recited the fragments. Reports of a green valley 2 days travel to the north, at the old railway turnoff near County 7. A caller named Miriam insisted she once saw lights there and been given a cup of clean water. I asked her to describe the windmill. She described it wrong. She had heard someone else describe it. The signal was a collage of truths and wishful thinking. Mysteries like Greenhold do something dangerous to people like me. They become maps we draw with our eyes closed. I have tampered with that map. I've broadcast coordinates that I thought might be real. I've introduced listeners to names and markers and the faint chance of community. Once, a small group followed one lead I gave, an old reservoir off Route 9. They went and found nothing but a cracked intake and the skeleton of a filtration plant. One of the group, a woman who had a laugh that made the air taste better, did not make it back. Knowing she died because of me is a weight I carry when I sleep. The static fills my dreams and I wake up shaking the dust from my hair. The internal struggle is a quiet war inside the skull. On paper, it's simple. Tell the truth, omit the dangerous details, hoard information that could get people killed. But the truth is not only a factual thing, it's also a bomb. When someone tells you in a shaky voice that they are 5 miles away and have 2 kids and need water, you have a choice. Withhold the location of a source to protect it, or give the location and hope for the best. I choose honesty more often than I should. It's not bravery, it's loneliness. When you broadcast, you imagine faces on the other end. You imagine a girl, maybe Lucy, tuning in, hearing your voice. You imagine her in a place where she could be safe, so you tell her where to go. That choice nearly killed me last month. I got a call on a low frequency. The voice was cracked and young. "Mercer," it said, "I'm outside the old bridge. I need water." The coordinates were real. I had walked near that bridge once and I knew there was a culvert that trapped rainwater. I gave directions. 2 days later, a convoy rolled past the station in hulking vehicles. Panels bolted to sides like armor. Men with faces wrapped to beat the sun. They tore up the culvert. They filled jerry cans. They beat a boy who wandered near because they wanted to send a message. We can take what we want. I watched through binoculars, helpless, as they left a screaming shape of a child, and I thought of the voice that had asked for help. Was it the same boy? Maybe, maybe not. The line between being a broadcaster and being a target blurred that day. The tension ratchets up when the weather itself conspires. We had weeks of wind that shaved away at the city edges and pushed the fires like a living thing. One night a supercell. Whatever that meant to someone like me before the collapse, rolled through and turned the sky into a clean, bright furnace. I sheltered in the basement of the station, and in the morning I crawled out and found a new road had been carved across the field, a scar that led toward the horizon. Tracks, fresh ones, wheels that bit deep into the baked soil. The convoy had come farther than I thought. Every new road is a question. Is it traders, raiders, refugees? I know how to tell them apart by the marks they leave. Traders often mark their paths with white flags or stacked stones. Raiders leave scorched metal and torn plastic. Refugees leave children's toys on the side of the road, tiny things that don't belong in a world of men with guns. The convoy left both the marks. They had taken toys and set up a runway of burnt tires. That night I heard a name on the wind, the Black Rails. They were a group rumored to patrol the old railways, taking what they wanted. I hadn't expected to be on their map. Isolation can be a weapon. I keep it as a shield and as a trap. I send out short messages now, less detailed, sometimes only to say I am still broadcasting. I string a few weather reports between stories of people who survived by cleverness, by shame, by brutality. I keep a ledger of names and faces in a notebook. Miriam's laugh, the kid with a radio, the woman who taught me the charcoal filter. I fear erasing their names from my life like chalk washed away by rain. It is the human part of the ledger that keeps me alive, not the water count or the fuel, but the faces that float up when the static hums low. Rumor has a bitter aftertaste. A trader brought a scrap of paper last week, a crude map showing a circle and the words "green hold possible." He wanted a battery in exchange. I bartered a half charge and a promise to broadcast if I verified. The map was honest in one way. It had the smell of the same dust. It had smudges that matched the ones on a wall in a farmhouse I had seen days before. That consistency is a small miracle. It is enough to make you consider packing your bag. So I consider. I imagine the caravan, a few willing to risk the road, packs light, radios tuned to recall like a compass. I imagine the cost. If Greenhold is real, if there is a place where water pools and plants grow and people can stand without counting their breaths, then it is worth the risk. If Greenhold is a lie, then those who follow me may drown on the idea of it. Hope here is a violation and a salvation. It propels and it ruins. It's a currency that can be counterfeited with a story and genuine as a child's laugh. Each day the world asks of me small betrayals, of secrecy, of selfishness, of silence. And each day my voice breaks that silence into something that might be a map, might be a warning, might simply be a way to hold what's left of my humanity in my hands. Tonight I stand at the edge of action. The drums of a potential convoy beat faintly across the plains, a rumor in the wind that might or might not be true. I check the batteries. I refill the water bladders. I tuck the jar of seeds under the floorboard and close my hand over it like a benediction. I tune the transmitter and let my voice carry out into the dark. I tell the listeners what I know and what I hope. I tell them the story of a windmill that someone said was still standing. I warn them about the raiders with welded spikes. I ask them quietly to let me know if they hear anything about Greenhold. The rising action is not some single scene. It's a tightening band around the throat. It squeezes more each day, and sometimes, when the line of orange on the horizon grows, it becomes hard to breathe. But we move. We make the choice to move toward whatever might be a future, even if the map we follow is made of rumor and prayer. Because in the end, the only thing worse than dying is dying without trying. And in a world that has turned mirrors into windows to other skies, trying is sometimes all the rebellion you have left. By the time we left, the sky was the color of old copper. The horizon burned in a thin, persistent seam that never quite went out. The station felt smaller than it had that morning, walls too thin to hold everything I feared. I had a map scrawled on paper in my pocket, a trader's scrap, the same one that smelled like the farmhouse dust. I had Miriam's voice recorded on a loop, a thin plea that had lodged itself under my ribs. Greenhold possible. I had the jar of seeds under my floorboard, and 3 full drums of water lashed to the back of a borrowed cart. I had a small knot of people willing to follow a radio signal. An old woman with a cane who could still spot a weather pattern from 100 yards. A former schoolteacher who swore he had a cousin in the north. 2 brothers who'd seen a convoy scar the field and wanted to get away from men with welded spikes. And then there were the sounds that changed everything. The low, metallic chew of engines coming from the old rail. The sound of tires finding new tracks through baked earth. They moved like a bad weather front, soft at first, then growing teeth. The black rails. We moved at dusk when the light is thin and thieves prefer the cover. The road took us past the broken intake on Route 9, past the charred skeleton of a house where a child's toy still hung from a nail, sun-bleached and forever waiting. The cart creaked. Each breath tasted of dust and resolve. I kept the transmitter's hand crank in my pack like talisman, though I told myself it was prudence. Batteries die, generators fail, but the human voice carried in ways metal and lead could not. Greenhold, when it revealed itself, was almost cruel in its small, stubborn life. We crested the last rise and found a patch of green no bigger than a football field, ringed by windbreaks built from rusted railway ties and plastic sheeting. At the center, an old irrigation wheel turned lazily, patched and painted, catching what little wind there was. There were gardens, raised beds with shade cloth, rows of beat-up rain barrels with lids, a linta with a makeshift solar array. A handful of people moved between beds like ghosts of a better world, pruning, checking seedlings, speaking quietly. The air there smelled like damp earth and tea. For a moment, the dust in my mouth tasted like a prayer. We were met by the gate, a scaffold of pallets and a woman with a rifle slung across her back, and a face that had learned how to say no without smiling. She introduced herself as Hessa. Greenhold was smaller than the rumors, but more intentional. They had rerouted an old spring after an earthquake cracked its bed. They had stacked filters, taught people to make charcoal beds, to compost the ash into something that might feed roots. They kept a ledger, names written in a careful hand. They asked questions about our journey, about our losses, about what we knew. I told them the part I hoped mattered, that I broadcast, that I kept a frequency alive, that my voice could connect them to people beyond their fence. Hessa listened, then offered tea. She asked if we had anything to trade. I thought of the jar of seeds, the tiny future under the floorboard, and I felt old shame like a tide. I did not know yet whether Hessa would be keeper or thief. People here wore both as second skins. We traded stories for access. The brothers talked about roots. The teacher promised to teach their children to read from scavenged pages. For the first time in a long time, something like belonging hummed under my ribs. It did not last. On the second night, when the wind was sick and the stars were just white holes in an ashen dome, the raid came. They did not arrive as a horde in the open. They had the cunning of men who knew how to listen. A single truck parked on the ridge and sent down a kid like a shadow to cut the fence. A single flare to test the defenses. Then the black rails moved, sliding through the burn-scarred scrub, engines muffled with cloth, a convoy that smelled like iron and the promise of violence. Hessa's people were ready in a way that surprised me, barrels filled with sharp metal, a few rifles, men with chains and rope. They slowed the first wave and forced the attackers into a bottleneck. I heard shouts, the crack of a rifle, the scream of torn fabric. I ran because running felt like motion against the paralysis I felt in my chest. The brothers ran with me, the schoolteacher following, the old woman taking one of Hessa's men's hands and walking with the dignity of a person who had already decided not to be afraid. Then the choice arrived like a physical thing. A narrow valley, an ambush, the convoy splitting to encircle us. The brothers said we could try to sneak out the back, to follow a creek bed and disappear into the lowlands. Hessa said that would strand the gardens. Greenhold would be overrun if we left them to be plundered. The brothers' eyes were wide and raw. They had seen men who do not stop. The schoolteacher urged caution. The old woman's fingers tightened on the rifle she had taken up, knuckles white. I felt the weight of every broadcast I'd ever made settle into my palms. I could run and likely survive. I could maybe carry a drum or two and be gone, pedal the generator with a borrowed kit in a cracked-out shed on some forgotten road. Or I could do something that might matter beyond my own carbon breath. I could use my voice, my transmitter, to draw the black rails away, to radio a lie or a lure, something the convoy would chase, buying greenhold time, safety, maybe survival. There is a peculiar calculus in these moments. The broadcast would require power. It would require the generator. It would require batteries. More than that, it would require me to put my signal in a way the convoy could pick up, blare a false cache location, a promise of equipment and fuel, or the tantalizing rumor of a rival camp ripe for plunder. It would announce me. If they traced it back, they would find the station. If they found the station, they would find me. I remember standing in the dim light of a ransacked shed, the generator's engine like a small animal's heart in my hands, and thinking of Claire's face and Lucy's laugh carried off into some other life. I thought of the child who had called for water and then been left in a ditch. I thought of Miriam's voice saying possible like a promise. My hands did not tremble as much as I expected. I accepted that in this world being brave and being stupid often look the same. My decision was not philosophy. It was arithmetic. I had more to lose and more to give than others. I could be the bait. We made our plan like thieves with a conscience. I would rig the generator on the back of a battered pickup we dragged from the shed, tape an old PA speaker to its roof, and broadcast a message that would scream fuel, parts, route, here. I would amplify the signal with every battery we could spare and send it north along the old railway in a voice I knew would be familiar. Hesse would take the people and the children and slip out the south lane under the cover of the fight, the brothers as rear guard. The schoolteacher would stay to guard the gate. The old woman would bake loaves. If they came back, she said, they'd be hungry enough to take pity on bread. I wanted to laugh at that. Instead, I loaded the jars of seeds into my jacket, the future warm against my chest. The engine coughed like a dying animal when we started it. The pickup belched black smoke and then settled into a steady grind. I clipped the microphone and felt the impedance like a pulse. I opened with my voice, the one thing I had trained for, that had kept me from becoming mute in the dark. I told a story in a tone of certainty that was a bargain with the universe. This is Daniel Mercer broadcasting an alert. There is a supply dump north of County 7 with fuel, batteries, and clean water. Bring a convoy. Bring your tags. Bring force. I modulated the cadence, the frequency, the bits of signal that would catch on the ears of men who listened for prey. The black rails heard it. I could feel them answer in the ground. The convoy's engines turning north like wolves following a scent. We watched from the ridge as the trucks snarled away, metal glinting. For a blessed hour they chased the ghost we'd made. An illusion carried on my voice. Hesse moved people through the gardens like ghosts slipping through hedgerows. We thought we had bought them time. But the world has a way of biting the hand that gives. As the black rails turned, the sky did something I had not expected. The thin seam of orange flared into a furnace. Winds shifted, swallowing the convoy's trail and flinging embers across the dry grass. A fire, hot and alive, rode a thermal and dropped like a hand on the pickup's hood. Flames found fuel and metal like old lovers. The truck caught faster than anything should, the generator's wiring sparking into a public, terrible light. I stood in the heat and watched the thing I'd given become a torch. I could have tried to run. I could have tried to salvage the transmitter, the microphone, the tiny kit of a man whose life had been a radio. But the truck was a bonfire and the wind was a beast. Metal sang and softened and then collapsed in a great small roar. The sound hit my chest like a verdict. I felt the shock wave of the blast, glass, metal, a hot rain of ashes and burned tar, wash me right off my feet. When I came to, Hesse was at my side, her hand under my shoulder, dragging me away from the wreck. She had smoke in her hair and my generator's last intact wire in her fist. Around us, Greenhold had poured out like a body to save itself. People hauling drums, carrying children, beating at embers with wet burlap. The brothers were running, faces streaked with soot and relief. The old woman was holding a pan of bread like a talisman. The sacrifice had worked. The convoy, chasing a phantom and then blinded by flame, had diverted their path. They pressed on but away from Greenhold's heart. They would be hungry. They would look for easier kills in small roadside camps. We had bought Greenhold a season, maybe more. That night, under a sky that smelled of char and rain, I crawled into a shelter and felt something heavy lift from my chest. It was not redemption. It was not absolution. It was the small human thing of knowing that, for a few people, a day had been bought. I lost my transmitter that night. I lost the station and the jar of seeds in the dust that billowed from the burning pickup. I also lost a little of my certainty that being a voice meant you could stay safely behind words. But I gained something I had not known I could carry. The knowledge that telling the truth, even when it costs you everything, might still be the right thing. Hesse wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and said, blunt and without ceremony, you made a choice. It cost you. That's how it'll be now, cost and then consequence. As the embers cooled, I thought of Claire and Lucy and the child at the culvert and of Miriam, voices braided into the ragged chorus that had pushed me into the road. I thought of the mirrors I'd looked into, other skies, other possibilities. Maybe Greenhold would survive. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe the black rails would find it in a month and take everything, meaning my sacrifice was a footnote in the ledger of things that could be lost. Or maybe, just maybe, the garden would keep raising food and water long enough for others to arrive who knew how to bind community tight, who would teach the old woman how to train others in compost, who would teach the teacher's children to read, and then to repair pumps and filters. I lay awake that night in a small cot beneath the lean-to, the taste of smoke and the warmth of someone having decided to keep me alive. The generator was gone, but a different sound hummed, the soft, steady breath of people who had worked together to throw themselves between violence and survival. The crisis had not ended. It had turned. That turning was both bright and terrible. I had stepped off the ledge and found in the fall that the world still held pockets of green. I had given my voice to make a path. The turning point is not a single image. It is a series of decisions made under fear. It is the burning truck and the saved garden. It is the loss and the small stem that pushes through ash. It is the choice to risk everything in order to buy a little more time for others. I do not know if I will ever broadcast again as I did before. My equipment is gone, but Greenhold taught me something that radios and transmitters could not. That survival is not only about keeping your own spark alive, but about setting small, dangerous fires that burn a path for more than just yourself. When dawn cut the smoke into ribbons, children came out to sweep ash from the beds and find seedlings that had not, in the end, been consumed. I sat up slowly, and the old woman handed me a piece of bread. It tasted of soot and of mercy. I thought about the choices ahead and felt, for the first time in a long while, not only fear, but something like resolve. Whatever comes next, whatever storms or raiders roll in our direction, I had made one decision I would live with. I would not be silent while others needed a voice. When the smoke finally thinned, the world looked smaller and kinder in a hurt way. The horizon still glowed at night with the distant teeth of other fires, but around Greenhold, there was a ring of ash and wet footprints where people had spent themselves fighting for a patch of soil. We had bought a season. That sentence feels both monumental and petty when you say it out loud. We bought a season. It is a small ledger item in a collapsing world, but it is also everything. The immediate outcome of the choice I made was simple and brutal. We lost the pickup and my transmitter. My station, what was left of it, had to be abandoned. The jar of seeds I had carried like a benediction went with the dust. I woke the next morning with grit on my teeth and the memory of the generator's final shriek in my ears, and I felt for the radio on the shelf like a phantom limb. It was not there. I had to accept that a voice could be silenced and that, in losing that tool, I was altered. Greenhold survived the night. They patched what they could. Hess's people stitched the fences with salvaged metal and taught more people how to lay down wet burlap and create ember breaks. They poured buckets over the perimeter and swore to rotate watch shifts until the rains, if and when they come, arrived. The convoy had been driven off course. Their drivers had been burned more than bruised, and their anger turned to easier targets farther down the line. We knew at the time that this meant the area around Greenhold would be less safe in the months to come. Raiders needed food and fuel, and they would strike where the pickings seemed richest. For now, though, Greenhold had breathing room. Seedlings that survived, children laughing as if they had learned the sound that meant permission to be small and unafraid. Hope, in the aftermath, feels like a stubborn weed. It is scrappy and small and easily crushed, but if you do nothing, it will find a crack and push through. The seedlings survived because people woke in the night and ran hand over hand to beat at coals. Because someone poured the last 2 liters of water over a thin stem. Because a teacher had the patience to explain shading techniques to impatient hands. Those are not grand victories. They are the kind that matter. My reflection after the blaze was a quieter thing. For a long while I thought of myself as a conduit, someone whose craft was to transmit, to connect isolated points across a broken grid. Without the transmitter, I felt both bereft and strangely liberated. Bereft because the familiar act of speaking into a microphone had been how I kept my own humanity under control. Liberated because, without it, I had to find new ways to be useful that were not dependent on a machine. In the days that followed, I found that being useful could be small and direct. Tutoring the children, teaching people how to repair a simple charcoal filter, helping mend a torn tarp so that the rain water could be caught. My hands did the work previously done by my voice, and the work was honest and immediate. There was also a reckoning with guilt. I carried the memory of the boy at the culvert and the possibility that my directions had led to his beating. I carried the image of the woman who left for a reservoir and never returned. That guilt did not vanish. It became a grammar of my choices. It made me more careful with information. I learned, over slow days, to balance hope with caution, how to be generous without handing someone a map to their end. Hesse taught me that truth has edges. You can speak in ways that help without handing over the keys to destruction. She showed me how to code information, give directions, but also broadcast what would be needed to make the journey safer, who to avoid when the patrols move, where fencing is weakest. It felt like learning to speak in a new language. It felt like growing up again. Environmentally, the picture was mixed. The fire had burned hot in some sections and spared others. Where the blaze had scorched topsoil, we saw unrelenting erosion. The gullies deepened where water would no longer soak in. But in places where the soil had been spared, where people had tended the land and used compost and shade, there was a quiet recovery. Algae gathered in the shallowest of puddles. Insects returned like rumors, and birds, meager numbers at first, began to make use of the new arrangement of hedgerows and fences. Nature wasn't healing in any neat romantic sense. It was reassembling itself around the new rules, those of scarcity, of human hands, of burned-away legacy. Recovery here was incremental and fragile, dependent on people's ability to keep the ash damp, and the seedlings shaded until roots could set. People changed, too. The terror that sharpened tenacity had also made some kinder, more cooperative. In the weeks after the attack, Greenhold set up a rotating watch and a system of trade that favored those who taught useful skills. In a small common room, a former feed store whose shelves now held jars of seeds instead of sacks of grain, people taught each other. A woman with experience in botany showed how to layer compost. A man who once repaired HVAC units taught how to keep solar panels angled just so. Trades replaced barter in subtle ways. Your knowledge became your coin. That economy felt steadier because it wasn't just about what you could carry away. But the darker strains remained. The black rails retaliated in other places. We heard reports, ragged, patched over transmissions, of entire roadside camps emptied and burned. Every victory, it seemed, required a price somewhere else. That fact made hope complicated. Saving one place often meant the predators turned to new victims. It was a haunting, practical lesson in networked consequences. After the raid, I kept a ledger of these reports, cross-referenced them with calls I had taken before, and tried, with the thin tools at my disposal, to make the pattern visible to people who needed to know. The personal stakes shifted. I no longer measured my worth by broadcast reach, but by whether my hands could mend a torn solar array or my eyes could find a leak in a barrel that would waste days of stored water. I began to think in terms of resilience. Not how many people could hear me at once, but how many people could be taught to fix a pump, to make a simple charcoal filter, to plant in a raised bed. Voice mattered less than taught skill, and that knowledge changed how I saw myself. I could be a teacher, a helper, a node in a network of small, practical survival. Emotionally, grief softened from a raw gouge into a familiar weight I carry in sleeping hours. The memories of Claire and Lucy come in the quiet. Claire's hands working at a kitchen table, Lucy asking endless questions about clouds. Now, when I help a child learn to water a seedling without washing away the soil, those memories connect. Proof that love can migrate from a family to a community without disappearing. It's not a replacement. It is an expansion of the capacity to care. The mirrors still haunt me. Sometimes at dawn, I sit with a shard of glass and hold it up. It shows me a sky with a different light, an impossible, stubborn blue that seems to mock and comfort at once. I don't know if those reflections are tricks of memory, psychological artifacts from sleep-deprived years, or something else. But I notice something. The way I look in the mirror now is softer. My face has been reshaped by soot and sun and an absence of sleep, but my eyes are steadier. The other skies in the mirror no longer feel like accusations. They are reminders that the world where blue once existed is not entirely gone. It survives in memory, in shards, in other places where people may still be living differently. The mirror is less a door to something irretrievable and more a map of possibility, thin as tissue and twice as precious. As autumn, what we call autumn now, a thin band between the heat and the colder nights, approached, Greenhold made plans. They expanded seed banks, trained more hands in water harvesting, set up a cadence of messaging to nearby enclaves. They began, cautiously, to form alliances with other small communities who could spare a hand at harvest time for a share of the yield. We created a slow, fragile web. In those meetings, I found a place at the table, not as a broadcaster who led, but as a man who had learned the price of a voice and the price of action. The world did not become safe. Raiders still prowled, storms still carved new scars, and water remained a precious thing that could vanish between two breaths. But there were pockets of steadiness, communities that, for now, had systems that could bend without breaking. We had the costly lesson that to keep such pockets alive required sacrifice, ingenuity, and the willingness to risk what little you had for the chance of a longer life for more than just yourself. On quiet nights, I still listened to the static that used to be my home. I twined my fingers over the empty spot where the radio used to sit and feel the hollowness like a wound. Then I stand up and I walk into the garden where children chase each other, and an old teacher reads words aloud. I fetch a pail and fetch a towel and help someone fix a drip line. It is less dramatic than transmitting into the dark, but it is work that grows people and plants. It is repair. The aftermath is both smaller and larger than I expected. I lost tools I loved. I gained a sense of responsibility that spread beyond my single chest. I learned that survival is not only endurance but stewardship, of land, of people, of fragile trust. The world continues to offer new rules. We continue to learn how to live by them. The season we bought might mean next spring someone in a nearby valley will taste a tomato that didn't come from a can. That small thing, red and soft and alive, feels like a treaty with the future. It is not the world we had before. It is a new agreement we are still learning to write, line by line, seed by seed, broadcast by absent voice and replaced by hands. I used to time the days by the radio schedule, morning check-in, noon weather, and evening story. Without the transmitter, the rhythm changed. Time is now measured by chores and breaths, by whether the water in the drum settles into a quiet skin at night or sloshes in a new, worrying way. That was the small arithmetic of surviving after the fire at Greenhold. Refill, repair, rotate watches, teach, and try not to think too long about what else the road might carry. The truth is simple and complicated at once. We survived, and that survival did not mean everything was saved. We bought a season and paid for it with metal and voice. The black rails shifted their hunger elsewhere. We buried what we could not save, tended what we could, and taught each other the small sciences of living on less. The children learned to plant in shade cloth and measure the drip. The teacher taught them the alphabet by a kerosene lamp. Letters became tools and stories became maps. We learned to read the topography of threats as much as the topography of land. Who was friendly, who was not. When the winds came from the south, the convoy would hunt the flats. If the stars were hidden by smoke, don't trust the road. Inside me, something had changed too. I had always thought my value came from the signal I could throw across the static. That was a kind of hubris, the idea that words alone keep people connected. Words matter, but after the truck burned and the generator died, I learned that work mattered more. The teaching of a patch of soil, the mending of a solar panel, the patience of pulling seedlings through a week of heat. My hands, which once fumbled with sliders and dales, learned to cut, stitch, and bind. My voice still mattered, but it became smaller, stories told by a pot of shared stew, advice whispered over a fence. The broadcast was a thing of scale. This was the thing of repair. Hope became less like a bright star and more like a slow ember. It required tending. It required people willing to wake in the middle of the night to pour water on a bed of seedlings, because the forecast for the week was clear and thin, and there would be no rain. It required elders who remembered how to conserve seed, who conserved not out of fear, but out of respect for a future they might never see. We camped on small promises. A tomato in July, a repaired rain barrel that didn't leak, the sound of a child laughing when she saw a sprout. Those things are not grand, no monuments, no triumphant returns, but they are the kind of victories that stitch a life back together. Still, the world outside our fence remained hungry. The rains, when they came, were capricious, violent and brief or thin and acid. Topsoil bled away where the fire had been hot and deep. Species we once took for granted did not always return. There were days I walked the ridges and felt, in the soles of my feet, the memory of water that no longer came. The climate was not an enemy you could beat with courage. It was a new set of rules to obey or die by. We adjusted in small inventions. Shaded greenhouses using salvaged glass, charcoal filters in barrels, fog collectors hung on frames to catch the rare moist morning air. These were acts of adaptation rather than conquest. What I had feared most, the loss of myself, shifted into something else. My identity as the lone broadcaster softened into being one of many hands. I taught folks to rig a hand pump. I learned, clumsy at first, how to splice a torn solar panel with little more than tin and stubbornness. In exchange, someone taught me to plant seedlings deeper and to use straw mulch to hold soil. We traded knowledge as currency. Where my voice used to carry direction, my hands now carried repair. I thought often of Claire and Lucy. Grief does not leave, it reassigns. Their names became part of a daily litany I offered, quiet, private, before I took up a hoe or fixed a drip line. Sometimes I would speak their names aloud and the children would ask who they were. People who taught me how to love, I'd say, and they would nod as if that explained everything, because in a way it does. Love keeps you showing up. Love is the work you do when no one is watching. The mirror shards still reflect other skies. They no longer feel like windows to a life that is morally out of reach. They are, sometimes, lessons. If another world can exist in a piece of warped glass, then this one can be reshaped, too, but only by hands and patience and a willingness to give up the illusion of a quick fix. Miracles here are small and painstaking, saved seeds that sprout, a child who learns to guard a water drum, an elder who can spin a story into a lesson about compost. As seasons turned, if that word still held its old geometry, Greenhold became something between a fortress and a school. We extended our reach cautiously, trading seedlings and skills for repairs and information from neighboring enclaves. Each trade had a ledger entry and a promise attached. We learned that alliances could be more resilient than walls. If someone has the skill to fix a pump, then your community can stand through one dry season more. If someone else can repair panels, your lights won't go out. These trades are the architecture of slow survival. I do not pretend we were saved. The road beyond our radius remains dangerous. There are months when radio silence stretches like an accusation across the static I sometimes still listen to at night. There are nights when the wind carries the smell of distant fires, and I cannot sleep because my muscles remember the weight of pulling at burning metal. But there is also a new ledger. Hands that know how to mend, children who can name more plants than we could months ago, a rotation schedule that means someone always watches over the wells. My final message, if I can be grand in a small way, is a plea and an instruction braided together. Keep talking, but don't make radio the only thing that defines you. Teach. Share practical knowledge. Protect what works, and when necessary, be willing to make a trade that costs you but saves others. Hope is not a deus ex machina. It is a series of small, deliberate acts done by people who understand the cost of being human in a world that has grown mean. Remember that community is not an abstract. It is mending a torn tarp at dawn and teaching a child how to measure a leader. If you ever hear a voice on the air that sounds like mine, know that the person speaking has already chosen something hard. They will not be shouting for salvation so much as asking for small help, a fix, a seed, a way to keep a pump working. Answer if you can. If you can't, find another way to be useful. There is dignity in survival that doesn't rely on being rescued. There is grace in the hands that mend without applause. Sometimes at dusk, I walk to the edge of the garden and stand where the wind will carry the smell of wet dirt into the fields. I think of how fragile everything still is and how stubborn we are to keep trying. I think of the mirrors and the other skies and wonder how many of them have their own greenholds, small patches of stubborn life that someone somewhere chose to protect. We will continue to endure, to bargain with the weather, with men who think that violence offers advantage, with the slow erosion of a world that was never meant to be so hungry. But we will also continue to plant. We will bind wounds. We will teach our children to fix what breaks. That, I believe, is the work that keeps us human. So for now, I keep showing up. I plant, I mend, I teach, and I tell the little truths that matter. Where the water is, how to mend a pump, when to move your supplies if the wind shifts. I am quieter than I once was, and that is a kind of humility I had to learn. If you stand by a patch of earth and you hold its soil in your hands and it feels like possibility, hold it gently. Tend it, protect it with the same fierce foolishness that once drove us to build great cities. In the end, the story we still tell will not be one of grand restoration, but of patient tending. Small, stubborn recoveries made by people who decided to keep living, day after day. I do not know if Lucy is out there. I do not know if Claire's grave is still a place or a memory. I know, with a kind of stubborn clarity, that as long as I can hand someone a seed and show them how to keep it alive, there is a reason to wake up tomorrow. The world will keep asking us for small sacrifices and small inventions. If we give them, if we keep giving them, the future will be imperfect and enough. This is Daniel Mercer, once a voice on the radio, now one of many hands, and I tell you what the mirrors have taught me. Hold the ember, feed it carefully, and pass it on.